Welcome to the Football Reporters, a new podcast from ESPN FC. I'm Mark Ogden.
I'm Rob Dawson.
And I'm James Olley.
We're going to take you inside the world of our reporting, what we're hearing and what we're learning.
This week is football heading towards a breaking point. The calendar is so full that some top players won't get a meaningful break now until June 2027.
Now, James and Rob have both been away this summer in the US on the pre-season tour, so we're going to find out what they've learned, and we're also going to talk about Man City and their 115 charges, which is going to be addressed fairly soon.
I think we all saw in the Euros as well of people in general, how tired people were. You know, you could see the level, you could see even in the people's faces how tired they were of football, if you can say it that way. And I think that's how it will be as well this season. Of course, not in the start, or maybe for some, because someone will not get a lot of vacation. But I think that's the way we're going now. I don't think we can be sharp in every single game. I think we can try, but it's difficult to be sharp if you play over 70 games.
Well, that's Erling Haaland talking to the press in New York on Manchester City's pre-season tour of the US. His comments come at a time when the longest season in club football is up and running. City, of course, played in the Community Shield against Manchester United last weekend. And their last game of this season could be the 13th of July next summer if they reach the Club World Cup final.
So just to put this into context, the top players from Man City and Real Madrid in particular are going to play a full domestic season this year with an expanded Champions League. They've got an expanded 32-team World Club Cup next summer, another full domestic season, and then a 48-team World Cup. And you did a piece, Mark, this week about that. And a pretty simple question, really. Is football a breaking point?
Well, I mean, that's an answer which is different no matter who you ask. If you ask FIFA, they think there's plenty of room in the calendar for additional games. They say that the Club World Cup next year is basically taking the slot that was occupied by the Confederations Cup, which people might have forgotten, but it was an 8-team national tournament prior to the World Cup, which it doesn't really fit a 32-team club tournament replacing an 8-team international tournament. Well, the reality is, that I think the killer stat for me is that Erling Haaland's season this year, if they get to the Club World Cup final, Man City, will be 354 days long. I mean, so basically, don't have to do the math. That's just short of a year. That is a long, long time. Now, I've spoken to people who are close to Haaland. They say that he's looking forward to it. But his quotes that we just heard then suggest he's a little bit concerned. That burnout is a key issue. Now, again, FIFA will point to the fact that the actual calendar for clubs hasn't really changed that much over 20 years in terms of leagues and cups. It's the pre-season friendlies, which you guys know all about. You've been over to the US. We've all been on these tours in the past. And these do add to the calendar, but the reality is it's a bigger Champions League. In England especially, you've got 2 domestic cups. You've got the expanded, well, it's not an expanded Club World Cup. You've got Club World Cup, which is new to the calendar, 32 teams. Seems ridiculous. Add on to that, you've got international games as well, which we're not even kind of taking into account. So for Haaland, it's Mbappe as well. And I think Mbappe could play 75 club games for Real Madrid. Now, he's not going to play all those games, but he still has to be in the mindset to play those games. The clubs, Carlo Ancelotti has to be prepared to select a squad or a team for those games. So there's just a few stats that I was given by people involved in this. Jude Bellingham, during the Euros, he celebrated his 21st birthday. By the time he was 21, he had played 18,837 minutes as a player. David Beckham, 3,929. So almost 5 times more minutes as a 21-year-old than David Beckham. Vinicius Jr. at 24, 344 games in his career. By the same stage at 24, Ronaldinho had played 162. So there's no doubt that football has now been asked to play many more games at a much higher intensity. And I do think that burnout's an issue. I spoke to fans, I spoke to agents, I spoke to the PFA, I spoke to lots of people in this piece, and people have different ideas. But I think from my perspective, the game is overheating fast.
Well, the problem is it comes down to greed. It's simply greed. And the players are the ones that are caught in the middle of it, really, because it's the organisations that all want their piece of the pie and expanding it year on year. It reminds me of, that scene in Breaking Bad where Skyler takes Walt to that storage facility and she pulls off the cover and there's this massive pile of money. And she says to him, how big does this pile have to be? And you do sort of think somebody needs to ask that question of FIFA and UEFA and these big organisations that that make so much money. The last revenue cycle, FIFA's money, I think the revenue was $7.5 billion. It's projected to go up to something like 11 in the next revenue cycle. How much do they need? At what point do we say, actually, we don't need to prioritise making more cash here. We need to prioritise the protagonist's welfare and well-being, which of course is the players.
Well, but I don't think that'll ever happen, will it? You're talking there about protecting players. It seems to me that there's a couple of options. Either the players unite and say, right, we're going to go on strike. We're not happy with the workload and we're not going to turn up for these games, which would probably force meaningful change because you can't have a game without the players. Or the governing bodies introduce something. I know you mentioned in your piece about what they do in some American sports, in particular the NBA, where they do load management and say, a player can only play this amount of games. The problem with that is that you get a situation like you've had with Messi and Inter Miami, where people have bought tickets for games and he's not turned up because he's not fit or he's been rested, and all hell breaks loose. People want refunds because they've not seen the guy that they've bought the ticket to see. Without either one of those things, meaningful change isn't going to happen. And we're going to be sat here probably in a year or 2 or 5 or 10 talking about a calendar that's even more full now.
The problem is, because everybody has their own vested interest, it's going to require probably legislation to actually arbitrate this in a way that doesn't serve somebody's interest above somebody else's. And where I think what's quite interesting about this is that the union's case that they brought to the European Commission, so that's been brought by one of the guys who's working on that is Jean-Louis Dupont, who's actually in part of the legal team that won the Bosman case in '95, which obviously completely revolutionised the transfer industry. And I think the case that the European Commission has got to hear, I think what they want to do is they want a preliminary ruling on whether there's an interpretation of the EU law that basically requires employees, the players, to have their entitlement of an annual paid leave period. And surely that, as a fundamental principle, could actually be applied, which would mean that there has to be a 3 or a 4 week break that the players need to have every season, written into employment law, that would then stop a lot of this, let's fill the calendar with this, that and the other, and the players will fudge it and they'll come back and just carry on. But it's going to require, I think, legal intervention. And I do think that preliminary ruling is going to be quite important, and it will set the tone for what comes next, because if it does come down effectively in the players' favour, there's not a lot that FIFA and UEFA can argue back against that.
Well, I spoke to Maheta Malongo at the PFA chief exec, and he said that, I asked him, can you allow strike action? And he said, absolutely not. They cannot discount strike action. Now, players on strike, I don't think we're close to that, but it's a possibility, and it's happened in the NBA in the past. It's happened in the NFL where players have had lockouts and they've fought for rights, but I don't know. I mean, I just don't sense right at this moment that the players are in that place, because, players just want to earn the money. At the end of the day, they want to earn money. But I do think that one thing that Maheta said to me was that they are really keen for a maximum number of games to be implemented, between 50 and 60 a season. They want to be led by the science. And that involves as well a maximum of 6 back-to-back games. Now, what a back-to-back game is classed as, it's 2 games in 72 hours. That a player should do no more than 6 on the bounce. Now, a lot of the times, players are in the game to earn money, and they're in the game to be successful. But I think what we have to accept in this is that, forget about Lionel Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo. They're just completely on a different level. But I think we may have to accept the likes of Bellingham and Haaland, maybe these players will be superstars for 10 years rather than 15, because they just cannot play at such a level for so long. And I think I do find a little bit at times that some of the managers can be quite disingenuous about this, saying that there are too many games, and blame the TV companies, blame the owners, because the club owners and chief execs, the people that are largely silent on this, but they're the ones that are signing the contracts to play these extra games. They want more money, they want more games, more revenue. It kind of harks back to the Super League situation.
I was just going to say, the Super League sort of sits underneath all of this in the background, doesn't it? Just, that was the manifestation of a lot of clubs complaining about the lack of revenue, less so in the Premier League, because obviously that is just an outlier in terms of the money that it generates. But obviously the Premier League clubs jumped aboard the train. The 6 of them eventually joined it. But that was being driven by those sides who are going to be find the appeal of more games greater because of their revenue streams. I
just wonder at some point, will a big player, a superstar player, a Bellingham, an Mbappe, a Haaland, be bold enough to say, yeah, I'm going to sign for you, but I'm going to play 50 games a season?
I don't see that ever happening, because you've got top players who want, with the best will in the world. I know, like Rafael Varane, hasn't he recently, or relatively recently, said that the schedule was too much. But all these players still want their appearance bonuses. They still want to be paid to play. Yeah. You've got managers like Pep Guardiola who sit in front of the press and go, there's too many games, the schedule's nuts. But he refuses to have a bigger squad of players because he wants to keep a tight squad of players and doesn't really want to rotate his players and bring in kids because he knows if he brings in kids he might lose a game and then the criticism will heap on. So it's all very well saying all these things, the players, the owners, the managers, whatever. It's another thing entirely actually doing something about it.
And what happens if we limit players to 50 games a season, for instance, and Haaland by mid-April has played 47, and he's got a Champions League final to come up, he's got a Premier League decider, and he's got, maybe an FA Cup final. Then what happens? But this is squad management. But you're right, Pep Guardiola and Jurgen Klopp, two managers that really call for extra subs, barely use them. So I can understand why FIFA at some points are saying, look, it's not just on us, on FIFA, because these managers have asked for this, they haven't taken advantage of it. I mean, just going back to the pre-season tournament point, pre-season tours, I did my first pre-season tour in 2006 with Man United. We went to South Africa, and it was just after the World Cup in 2006. And just to give you an idea of how much things have changed, it was a 3-game tournament over 10 days. I think they played Orlando Pirates, Kaiser Chiefs, and the winner of the Orlando Pirates Kaiser Chiefs game. And the press pack was 6. There was 6 of us there. Now, the press pack is probably 60 or 100. There's written media, there's TV, there's YouTube, there's social media, there's everything. So the appetite for the game, from us, from everybody, from fans, is even bigger and bigger. So the pre-season element of it has grown incredibly over that time. I think you probably remember this. Arsenal would never go on a pre-season tour. They went to Austria under Arsene Wenger. 2-week tour of Austria, play, prepare. His idea was Arsene Wenger was, I want my players to prepare as best as possible. Now, we've seen over the time, I think Chelsea one year under Jose Mourinho had 4 weeks away, came back completely unready for the season. He lost his job, I think, mid-season. Eric Ten Hag has complained about situations like that. I think last summer United had a very kind of gruelling summer tour to the US. And, last season they had 45 injuries, Man United, more than anybody else. And they started this season with injuries as well. So, you have to wonder whether we're looking at the wrong issue. But there are too many games, full stop.
Just to sum up how silly this argument can be at times. You've got City, we talked about City and how their season could be so long. They're going to play in that World Club Cup at the end of this coming season. Pep Guardiola sat in front of the media and was asked specifically a couple of weeks ago, well, does that mean that if you're going to play in this World Club Cup, you're not going to go on a US tour to prepare for the next season? And he went, well, I can't say that because the club needs the money and we need to play the games to rate. And, it's the Premier League got these PSR rules. We need to make money to buy players and stuff. So something that the clubs can actively do. City could go to Austria and just chill out for 2 weeks before the season, play a couple of behind closed doors games, but they won't. They won't.
The answer to that, what I've been told, is that we don't know what the prize money is yet with this FIFA competition. We don't know what the venues are because it's still being talked about. But apparently, the prize money is going to be so big. You're talking maybe £80 million a club, certainly the big clubs, that they won't need to go to the US on tour because the money they will make on this Club World Cup was so big that they will have a pre-season. But to your point about players having the right to a break. When I spoke to the PFA about this, they're saying, yes, players are entitled to 3 weeks off. But 3 weeks off isn't finish one day and 3 weeks later play your next game. It's 3 weeks off completely and then you return to pre-season. As we've seen in the summer, I think Rasmus Højlund is a case in point. He played his last game for Denmark less than 4 weeks before his first game for Man United. And guess what? He's injured.
Well, quite a few. I mean, Harry Kane was always quite famous at Spurs for coming back early. And that 3 week, I think the 3 week, well, I was going to call it a rule, but it's sort of a guideline, and players, if they want to, can come back earlier. And obviously there's that, again, it comes back to self-interest because there'll be managers who'll be saying, well, look, I'm not suggesting that Harry Kane was put under pressure to come back, but I'm sure there will be players who have been told, look, we don't need you. We don't need, I won't name the manager, but there was a manager who's talked about this pre-season, and the way he frames it is this. He says, I want players who come back who are prepared to play, not preparing to prepare to play. And that's the difference now with pre-season. They want people who come back to pre-season ready. Well, they don't want to use it as a period to get ready.
Guardiola made that point. He said, I want players psychologically to want to touch the ball. He made that point, didn't he, in the US, that I don't want my players coming back mentally drained. So some players said we will start the season slowly because the players aren't ready to come back. They need to come back when
it'll be interesting to see what happens with City, particularly at the start of this season, because City have made the decision with the England players, and Rodri obviously played in that final, the Euros final as well, to give them an extended break. Didn't have them back before the Community Shield and said, come back this week and then start to get ready. United chose to do it differently and brought Mainu and people back, and they played in the Community Shield. It'll be interesting to see how City start the season without probably Walker and Foden and Rodri at full speed, whether they start to drop points early on, and then what Pep says about the rest that he's given his players. Because I imagine that he, in an ideal world, would have liked his players back 10 days ago to play half an hour in the Community Shield to be ready to play Chelsea on that first day. But as it stands now, they're not going to be ready.
One other area that this could move into, which I think I know Mikel Arteta is on the record talking about this. I think it's quite an interesting idea, is the idea that 25-man squads are insufficient now for this, and that actually you're going to need to go to 28 or maybe 30
Chelsea are already there.
Well, Chelsea can play twice, but you know, the idea that you are restricting squads to 25 members, but you're expanding the games that those 25 players are asked to play, is actually now incompatible with the modern calendar. And I think that there is a debate to be had there. You're accepting defeat in terms of trying to limit the number of matches, but if this is where we're going, and there is no arbitration on this in terms of drawing a line and saying, look, we are going to stop the number of games here, limit the number of matches that a player can play, then actually where else do you go other than saying, well, all right, we move from 25 to 28?
But this gets back to Arteta being a manager who's been disingenuous. I was at the Arsenal-Luton game last season where that was the one game where he changed his team, because prior to that and after that, for the running, he basically kept the same team.
Oh, well, but
because he wouldn't change his players.
He's on the record as sort of contradicting himself to some extent, to say that I actually would ideally like to work with 18 or 20, a bit like Guardiola does. You know, I only want the interchangeable players. There's a tight-knit group. There's an issue at Arsenal's academy at the moment. They've lost a couple of significant talents this summer to players, to clubs that are offering game time. And that is an issue because Arteta's not shown a great track record of trusting those kids to come through. So you're right, there is maybe a bit of a double standard there going on. But just on this point of games and expanded calendars, I do think that the squads are probably going to have to go up to accommodate it.
I don't think that Pep would even, if someone said to Pep, right, you can have 30 players in your squad, I just don't think he would do it. I think he would make the point that we just mentioned there about, you know, having a tight-knit group. He doesn't want players, you know, maybe number 28, 29, 30 who are playing 5, 6, 7, 8 games a year, potentially causing trouble in the dressing room because they're sat there not playing every week on the bench. It's an issue that he's got to deal with. I think if you told him that you could have 30 players in your squad, he would still have around sort of 22, 23 of a core group. Because it goes back to the point that we made right at the start of this, that everyone wants to make sure that their own little area is safe, and Pep wants to win games with the best team possible every single week.
Pep's an interesting one because you're right in all that you said, but the way he's looked after Phil Foden, when everyone was screaming, give him games, he said, no, he'll play when he's ready, to the point where Phil Foden's now 24, 25, and he's one of the best players in the world, you know, because Pep's managed him so well. I think you look at other players of a similar age. I think Marcus Rashford's a little bit older, but you could say that Rashford played so much at Man United that he kind of flatlined and he hasn't really found an uptick. Well, Foden's, you know, trajectory's been upwards all the way, and you have to credit Pep with that. But the flip side is Man City have got such a great squad, they can do that.
Well, because Foden's competing with Mahrez, with Grealish, with
doesn't need to play every
Silva,
week.
with Gabriel Jesus when he was
and
there.
also,
All of those.
You've got to credit Foden as well in that he sat there and listened to Pep and decided that was the best way to go. And you've got a situation a year ago with Cole Palmer, probably in exactly the same situation where Pep was saying, you're going to play, but you're not going to play every week. And he went, well, I'm going to Chelsea and to play every week. Obviously, that move has worked out for him. But it relies on the young player to sit there and go, well, yeah, all right, that's the right way to do it.
I mean, we've spoken about areas that can be, you know, brought in to help, you know, ease the problem. We talked about reducing games or having limits to games. I mean, I suppose from an English perspective, there are so many competitions. I mean, we still have the Carabao Cup, which has two-leg semi-finals, which is an absolute nonsense, really, because you get to January, the busiest time of the year after the Christmas break, and you're playing 2 semi-finals. So I think within the game itself, there is an onus for them to look at it more closely. One of the lines in the piece, I spoke to Professor Chris Brady, who's is into sports business, and he's analysed the situation with the crossover between business and sport. And he mentioned a phrase called co-opetition, which is cooperation and competition coming together. And he believes that down the line, the resolution to this will be FIFA, UEFA, the Premier League, all the big leagues will at some point find a solution, a common ground. And this could be Super League by stealth in many ways, whereby each of them has too much to lose by not agreeing to come to a compromise. They have to find a common ground. And whether that's 3, 4, 5 years away, FIFA wants to be involved in the club game. That's where the money is. The clubs want more money. The fans want to see high-end quality. So at some point, there will be an area where everyone comes together. I don't see it right now, but I suppose that Arsene Wenger's point when he came up with this new calendar idea 2 or 3 years ago is that the football calendar we have right now dates back to the 1930s. You know, that's how old it is, and it's not fit for purpose. So the whole element of stakeholders, the players, the owners, the clubs, the organisations, the confederations have to find a way to come together to make it all work for everybody.
It's hard to see it. This is why I come back to the legislation argument, because it's hard. You know, if you just take domestically, for example, and the English calendar here, the only organisations that have given any ground there really is the FA with scrapping because they're the weakest.
And look how that went down.
Yeah, but they've scrapped replays. They've obviously scrapped. They've done what they could do with their competition, effectively their flagship competition, the FA Cup. The Premier League. Look, we all know the Premier League is not. Yes, there's a chief executive. Yes, there's a sort of board structure there. But the Premier League is not anything other than the clubs.
Yeah,
there's not leadership there. You know, this is and so the clubs when the 20 shareholders meet, they're all looking out for themselves, and it just feeds down right from the top, right from FIFA all the way down to the individual leagues. It's all self-interest, which is why we've not had a situation where the independent regulator has been agreed. We've not had a funding deal for the EFL from the Premier League to satisfy everybody, because everybody wants their own piece of the pie.
And that shows you, that point you just made, that shows how difficult all of this is, because Klopp in particular with those 12:30 kickoffs, for example. Now the clubs all sign those off. Klopp sits in front of the media and goes, "I can't believe we're playing at 12:30 again."
Yeah, the owners.
Your club has agreed to play at 12:30. You're not. Who are you shouting at? You're not shouting at the broadcast company. You're not shouting at the kickoff time. You're shouting at your own club. They've sat in a room and agreed to the kickoff time that you hate, and that just shows you've got two massive personalities in one club, basically arguing against each other.
And why do they have the 12:30 kickoff time for the global TV rights?
Look, money decides all this. I think the nightmare scenario for fans of the game itself is that Saudi Arabia, Qatar will create a live-style situation in football where they will pay an inordinate amount of money to all the big clubs, all the confederations, that everyone gets a slice of the pie. It makes them all happy. The fans won't be happy, but the fans often don't really count in the decisions that are made at the top. And I think that's where I see it going, maybe in 4 or 5 years' time, whereby maybe football becomes like the NFL with a commissioner that runs it. In that sense, it's something that a lot of fans will not want to comprehend or even contemplate. But I do think we have to brace ourselves for that kind of massive change, because there's too much money, there's too many big organisations, there's too many big clubs, big owners that want the same thing.
The Live point is a really good one, because obviously the money that Live put into golf attracted all these top golfers. But the one thing that a lot of golfers said the reason why they moved is because they went from 3 rounds on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, rather than 4. And they said they wanted to play less golf for more money.
More games for more money. There you go.
But then if a player's given that opportunity, like if a league in, I don't know, Dubai or Saudi Arabia takes off and says, we're going to play 40 games, but you're still going to get paid the same money, in fact, you're going to get paid a lot more, it's a no-brainer, isn't it?
So this is supposed to be a football show, so we should maybe talk about some football a little bit. Now, both of you guys have been away on summer tours this year. We've got a lot of excitement about the Premier League starts on Friday, Manchester United against Fulham. So I think the starting point, obviously, United play first. So let's talk about Man United's summer so far. As usual, they've been busy, making headlines for the right or wrong reasons. So how have you assessed it so far?
Yeah, busy. Obviously, the fans will be happy that they've made some transfers. I think the jury is still out on those deals. Obviously, there's a certain amount of excitement when new players come through the door. Obviously, a load of new executives, best in class and all that, and have seemed to have stuck with the same transfer policy of signing players who Ten Hag has worked with in the past. Look, obviously, all of these players are good players, otherwise we wouldn't be signing for Man United. Whether they can show the potential that has led United down the road to signing them is another matter entirely, because we've seen time and time again that United sign players and it just doesn't work out.
So I'm going to have a bit of a crack at United here, but first of all, I think they have had a good summer in the sense that they got some good business done early on with Lenny Yoro and Joshua Zirkzee. Obviously, Yoro's injured now for a prolonged period of time, which is really unfortunate, because new club, you want to get off to a good start. They've got players out. I think they're going to get more players out, but I know there's some excitement about the signing of Matthijs de Ligt and Nussim Mazraoui from Bayern Munich. I think Mazraoui's a good sign. I think he's an upgrade on Aaron Wan-Bissaka. Yeah. Absolutely upgrade, I think, no doubt about that. Matthijs de Ligt, now, obviously he's a really good player. I'm not questioning that. I think the situation with de Ligt is he captained Ajax at 19. That he's obviously got something about him. But I remember I spoke to a contact of mine a few years ago. He worked at one of the big 6 clubs, and United was signing Bastian Schweinsteiger, and he said United are doing it again. So what do you mean? He says, you never, ever sign a player from a big club like a Bayern Munich, a Barcelona, a Real Madrid, because these clubs, right, they can pay the players whatever they want, so they never have to sell a player in terms of matching what the Premier League play. Also, they play for trophies. So his point was, why are they letting these players go? Man United, Bastian Schweinsteiger, Rafael Varane, Casemiro, Cristiano Ronaldo from Juventus. Not one of them was a success. Now, why Bayern Munich letting Matthias de Ligt go? They don't need the money. He's only mid-20s. It's not like he's had lots of injuries. But he played more than people think last season. But ultimately, Eric Dyer was playing more for Bayern Munich than Matthias de Ligt was. So, from Man City don't make this kind of signing. Arsenal don't make this kind of signing. Liverpool don't make this kind of signing in terms of buying players that have had a good run elsewhere. So I might be wrong. De Ligt might be a bit younger than the rest, but I still think signing players from big clubs, you're just going to get yourself stung.
It's funny because I'm going to preface this by saying that I think De Ligt is a good player. Like you said, there's obviously something about him. The summer of 2018, I was away with United on tour in the US, and Jose was desperate for a centre-half.
Yeah.
We did a pre-season game away at Bayern. There was only a couple of reporters there, and Jose taken a couple of us up to one side and said that he was desperate to sign Jerome Boateng from Bayern. Aging centre-half, obviously still a good player, but coming towards the end of his career. United refused to do it. And on deadline day that summer, there was a press conference at United, and we were sat in the little press room to the side at Carrington, and Ed Woodward walked in. And basically, Ed walked in to tell us why United weren't going to sign a centre-half or the centre-half that Jose wanted. And the reason he said was that United had learned their lesson about signing players from Bayern Munich. He said they got stung with Schweinsteiger, they got stung with Owen Hargreaves, players who arrived at United with big reputations, on big wages, and just didn't work out either because of their injury record or for whatever reason. And he left the room and said, we're never going to sign players from Bayern again. And then 6 years later, they've signed two lads from Bayern. Now, again, it's still very early to write players off, and they're obviously two very, very good players. Mazraoui played particularly well for Morocco at the World Cup. He's sensible signing, he can play both sides. United need someone who can play on the right and the left. They also need a centre-half who can replace Varane, particularly when you try to ease Yoro in. But as Mark says, these big clubs do not tend to sell players who they don't want to let go.
Yeah, there's a suspicion about the price as well. It feels cheap for someone like De Ligt in particular, who had the world at his feet 5 years ago, and was going for a far bigger sum. I mean, I have to say, I think he's a good signing for United because I think he's an upgrade on what they've got. I'm not sure about the comparisons with Schweinsteiger and Ronaldo and Varane. I mean, they were how old was Varane when he
they were
started?
older
28,
players.
29. Obviously, Ronaldo.
So why Bayern signing a player in his peak years? Is it 24?
Yeah, but because he's lost his way. I mean, I think United will probably look at somebody like Martin Odegaard as the hopeful comparison there. That this kind of teenage prodigy, had the world at his feet, lost his way a little bit. When Arsenal signed Odegaard, that was initially on loan. People thought, okay, here's another loan. He's going to hang around for 6 months. They got him for 35 million, I think it was, a similar kind of fee, and he's obviously become one of the best players in the Premier League. I still think at 24, there's definitely questions to answer, but that's built into the price. That's why they've been able to get him. But at 24, he's got time to learn his trade. His peak years are ahead of him. He can play out from the back, which is a big part of Erik ten Hag's preferred philosophy. How many times do United get caught in possession in their own half of the pitch and concede goals? He will help that. He knows the flip side is he knows the manager. He doesn't have to spend any time trying to understand what he wants from his centre backs. I've got concerns about the centre back pairing. Presumably it's going to be him and Martinez in terms of pace. They're not the quickest. If they want to play with a high line, they're going to have problems there. But I can see how it could work. Put it that way.
I think you could look at it two ways. Why have to do Mazraoui and De Ligt together? Could you not just get Mazraoui to cover the... But anyway, the situation is United have signed Matthias De Ligt. But before we move on to Arsenal, James, with you, Luke Shaw is injured again. Now, he upset a lot of Man United fans by not playing since February, going to the Euros, barely playing, then playing in the last couple of games. This is a really bad look, isn't it, for Luke Shaw?
Yeah, he's testing the patience of a lot of Man United fans. I think Man United fans can see that he's one of the outstanding left back in world football. But when you've got a situation where he gets injured playing for United in February, doesn't play again until the last stages of a major tournament, plays 1.5 games, then comes back to pre-season and is injured again. Lots of United fans, quite rightly in my opinion, are looking at that and going, Luke, come on.
He's had 10 years at United, and in that time he's played, I think, exactly half of the Premier League games available. So he's missed 5 seasons of football. Now, obviously, he had a terrible injury early on, but that was, 2015?
the problem is, and I can understand it from Luke Shaw's point of view, in that if you're given the opportunity to possibly play in a Euros final, that is very, very hard to turn down. I'm sure that he knows that it looks off, that he's not going to play for United now until after the international break. But if you give genuinely a player, the chance to play in a Euros final and win a major tournament, that is a hard thing for a player to go, no, you know what, I'm just going to go away to the Maldives and get ready for my season with my club. And I can understand the scepticism, but it's a really hard thing for a player to turn down.
Do you think he wasn't fully fit then for that final? I mean, I know he wasn't match fit, but in terms of, being over his injury.
Well, the United are saying it's a new injury.
What is his accumulation of injuries over the years leading to the new injury? Because that's what happens when players get injuries. They get subsequent injuries because the body isn't fully recovered. Now we're only talking 4 or 5 weeks is the Euros final. He's back in training. We might be getting back to the original point that maybe Luke Shaw should have had a longer rest. I know it sounds ridiculous but maybe he should have been away for 6 weeks because he's had injuries in the past.
Yeah.
Why is he back already? That's something that only United can answer. But I do think that I'm surprised he went. I mean, he hadn't played since February. I'm surprised the FA's doctors cleared him because the old days, if you don't play for your club, your last game, you don't play for international.
There's also an issue with United's. You have to look at United's medical department as well. And it's obviously a very touchy subject because you're talking about players' health and things. But you've got situations where Rasmus Højlund in the first game of pre-season is doing a muscle injury.
Absolutely.
Luke Shaw's not played. He's only trained at Carrington, and it's a muscle. It's not. These aren't contact injuries. These aren't someone's gone through the back of you, and it's just one of those things, and you've torn your ankle ligaments. These are muscle injuries. That to me screams that there's something wrong in the way that United players are being trained and prepared.
Well, Rasmus Højlund, in less than a month, has played for Denmark in the Euros, had a short break, got on a plane to the US, to the West Coast, travel, jet lag, straight back into training. It's not ideal, is it, to do that? It really isn't. We don't want to cast aspersions about Man United's medical staff here because they know the player inside out. But still, that gets back to the original point. Rasmus Højlund hasn't had enough of a break this summer. He just hasn't.
Well, I mean, you mentioned the medical staff, but is Erik ten Hag not got a question to answer
Absolutely.
here in terms of the training programme?
Yeah.
Because if what we're talking about is load, aren't we? Really, and if they're not judging the loads correctly, they're obviously overloading their players in training. Or it feels as though they're overloading their players.
The players
in
that
training.
certainly had concerns at the end of last season about the load that they were being asked to take on in comparison to a team like City, where Pep was openly just saying at the end of last season, but they're just not training. They're playing, they're resting. He was saying that they were going to sit in a fridge for 2 days, bring them out, play, back in the fridge. That wasn't happening at United, and some of the players, in particular the more experienced players, had concerns about what they were being asked to do in training.
I mean, I've always wondered whether sometimes you can buy players at a certain level that, the Man City players don't have as many injuries as others. Maybe certain players are better athletes, just naturally physically fitter, better. Are United signing players that aren't equipped physically to play at that level? They've had a lot of injuries. Are they signing, we talk about Varane, Casemiro, they're all players. Are United signed the wrong player that can't handle the fixture load and the mental strain of playing for a club?
It's interesting on that because Savinho, the lad that City have signed this summer, played for the first time in the Community Shield, and Pep was asked after that game about why did you sign him. The first thing out of his mouth was because he's durable. It wasn't about pace or trickery or he creates this, he creates that. Obviously he can do all that. The first thing out of his mouth was he's durable, and we know that he can play 50, 60 games, and he can play 2 games in 4 days.
I think that's one of the reasons why Arsenal didn't end up pursuing Pedro Neto, actually, because he's had a top player. Chelsea could have stolen another one from under the noses there, but I think he's missed a lot of games through injuries, and Arteta's got this big thing in his head about reliability, and your biggest strength is your availability, I think is how they phrase it internally. So Neto's one of those players who they were looking at for a long time, and then they've obviously decided to go elsewhere this summer, and I think that's durability is now a major factor that all the top clubs look at. Just
on Arsenal, you spent time with Arsenal in the summer. You spoke to Josh Kroenke. Now, from the outside, I know that Arsenal at times certainly the fans have had a strained relationship with the Kroenkes, but that seems to have been improving over the years. So what did you get from your chat with Josh during the tour?
Yeah, so I felt it was important to redress the balance a little bit, in the sense of that the Kroenkes, I think, rightly took a lot of criticism for their distance and their lack of engagement with the club over many years. I think the way that they communicated was particularly poor. They didn't really relay their level of ambition well enough, and there was certainly a criticism for a number of years that they were kind of just hiding behind Arsene Wenger, hoping that he would, this once great manager would sort of restore them to former glories, and obviously it didn't play out that way, and it got pretty toxic. And then, I think that was why when the European Super League collapsed in 2021, probably the biggest protests or the most vitriolic protests were at the Emirates, because it wasn't just about the Super League. It really resurfaced all of these issues about, that other clubs were feeling about, oh, you only want us to sign us up for the Super League because of the, you don't understand the game, you don't understand the fans, you don't understand the club. Well, Arsenal fans have felt that about Kroenke for years. And I think, though, the criticism of them during that period was they lack ambition, they're not prepared to invest in the market, and they don't understand football. And I think what they've done in the last 3 years is address each of those by having the bravery to appoint people like Edu, obviously Mikel himself, who was, had no managerial experience when he took that role. Sort of senior figures behind the scenes, department heads who've been able to. Richard Garlick is one who, very studious, very intelligent guy who's really professionalised the way that they do their business. Tim Lewis is another one who's come on board at board level to really improve that sort of angle of it as well. And they've spent money, they've invested heavily in the market, and they've shown that ambition year on year now to try and go and match City, to try and go and win the Premier League. And I thought the first thing I'd say about Josh is that he's very engaging. A complete contrast to this sort of vacuum that was filled with all this negativity towards the Kroenkes. They can't communicate, they don't like football, they don't understand the game. Very knowledgeable, very personable, very open with his time. It had taken a lot of conversations to get to the point where he was prepared to sit down and do an interview. It was the first kind of time he'd really spoken about Arsenal for about 5 years properly. But, was willing to sort of address some of the criticism they faced in the past. What was actually interesting about that interview was we did it in there was a community event in LA, and we were sat together on a sofa, and the press officer was alongside us as well. And I really wanted to get into a lot of the criticism that his father had received, Stan, because he'd gone to those AGMs once a year and been sort of personally heckled, face to face by really angry Arsenal supporters. There'd been effigies of him burnt outside the ground and real personal vitriolic criticism. And I really wanted to get into that with Josh and just kind of humanise it a bit, because they've never talked about it. But opposite us was Stan Kroenke. He was sat opposite us for the entire interview, and it kind of, I'd never quite had this scenario where I was sort of really wanted to get into this detailed, personal, quite
call him over, so come on, Stan.
Well, he did at one point. He did come over, and we did have a brief chat about the Emirates Stadium and possible renovations and work they might look to maybe expand it or improve the stadium, update it, upgrade it, that kind of thing. But Stan came over and we had, as I say, a few minutes chat. He shook my hand. He again engaging everything that people don't think the Kroenkes are. I think they feel they've come through a very difficult period. They obviously had a situation with the board level where Alisher Usmanov had about 30% of the club, and for years those two were at loggerheads. Usmanov wanted to kind of pile cash in and become a kind of Abramovich style benefactor, if you like, where we just do this at the behest of one guy. The Kroenkes wanted to grow it more organically and do it with, sort of, as it's turned out, more within FFP and PSR rules. And once they bought the Usmanov out of his stake, they had total control, and they were able to kind of navigate then through COVID, then through the Super League, and then get themselves to a position where they're not on the defensive anymore. And I just thought it was, I thought it was a piece that was worth doing. I thought it was a piece that hopefully gave a different side to KSE. Without being too sort of complimentary, because they have made mistakes like any ownership have, and ultimately they still haven't achieved their grand ambition, which is winning the Premier League.
So in terms of negativity, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Sorry. When did they get Arteta to sign this contract? Well,
the mood around that was, it's quite interesting you bring that up, because we're sat here, 2 days before the start of the season. My understanding was that situation would be resolved before the first game.
Right. So it could still happen.
So it could still happen, but they are running out of time to make that a reality. There's relaxation on all sides about this, in that the board aren't worried. Arteta's seemingly happy where he is. The only thing that nags away at the back of my mind is that if this is Pep Guardiola's last season at Manchester City, and that is a big if, if they're looking at replacements and they want continuity,
You don't leave Arsenal for Man City. You just don't.
well, I tell you this: when Jurgen Klopp announced that he was leaving Liverpool, I went to the press conference. I think it was that day or the day after, and Arteta was asked about Klopp and his impact in the Premier League and that kind of thing. And I said to him, well, you know, Klopp has said, I'd never manage another club in England. Arteta had given a load of answers about how much he loved Arsenal and the project and all this sort of thing. And I said to him, so would you ever manage another club in England? And he said, well, who knows what will happen in the future? I'm young, you know, the classic non-answer. And I just thought it just set alarm bells ringing at the back of my mind. I just thought, I do wonder whether one day, as unpalatable as that move would be for Arsenal, whether maybe he could end up managing City one day in the future.
City would fancy their chances. The last time Pep was looking to sign a new deal, we were sat around at dinner before a Champions League game with some of the City chiefs and bosses before this game, and someone said, "Oh, you know, who would you get if Pep does leave? Who's out of work?" And one of them turned around and goes, "Why would it have to be anyone out of work? We're City. We can go and get anyone we wanted." So it wouldn't put them off.
Over the years, though, Man City have had all these. I mean, it's been going back to 2008. It was going to be Jose Mourinho next. It was going to be they like Brendan Rodgers. They like Roberto De Zerbi. They like Mauricio Pochettino. Yeah, they like Mikel Arteta. He knows the club, but I still think that when you're managing a club like Arsenal, you don't leave a club like Arsenal for Man City. It's not like on the Wenger years when people like Adebayor and Nasri left to Man City. It's Arsenal. It's one of the great historic clubs. It's like, I think Liverpool, Man United, Arsenal, when they've got the best players or the top manager, they don't lose people. So
I mean, I have to stress that the expectation on all sides is that he's going to sign a new deal. I'm just saying this has just bubbled along in the background, and if we get to September, and
he needs to sign. He needs to get it done soon, because it would look otherwise that he's stalling or something. And it, you know, he talks about how he's grown the club and how this team that he's got. He has to kind of throw himself behind that now by saying, "Look, this is proof I'm now going to stay for 4 or 5 years." Just on clubs that are less stable than Arsenal, Chelsea have had an interesting summer. Players coming, players going. Again, homegrown players moved on, told not to train with the first team. Enzo Maresca basically seeming to parrot whatever the line that the club owners want to give him. How do you rate Chelsea's summer so far?
Well, in a way, it's a summer of change, but it's more of the same. You know, it's a new manager. There's obviously new players coming and going, and yet there's still this through line of I wouldn't quite call it chaos, but certainly instability that really puts Maresca on the back foot, I think, going into the new season, because he's got to get results straight away. The fans aren't overly impressed with pre-season. They lost 4 of their 6 games. They didn't look great in a lot of those. I was at the first one. I spoke to Maresca. We had his sort of first sit-down interview, and during that interview, I was asking him about transfer policy in particular, and saying, look, you know, the word was behind the scenes that Pochettino was pretty unhappy with the level of influence that he had in the transfers. Yes, he had a say, but he certainly wasn't the final arbiter on who they signed. Have you been given assurances about signing players and the level of influence you will have? Are you comfortable with it? He's like, yeah, it's fine. You know, again, like you say, towing the party line. Yeah, it's all fine, it's all good. I think in this context, Dewsbury Hall is a really interesting signing, and there's a lot of pressure on that kid, because from what I'm told, that was Maresca pushing that one. Makes sense, right? He was at Leicester. Maresca was obviously manager at Leicester. Chelsea, I don't think, had any interest in Dewsbury Hall in particular as a club. I don't think he was someone that they'd scouted or had been advanced by the analytics department. They say they rely heavily on that in terms of identification. So if Dewsbury Hall comes in and he's not good, he has a difficult 6 months. When they get to January and Maresca says, look, I think I want this player, the club are within their rights, and given how they operate, I like to say, well, look, we gave you one, didn't really work, so we're going to continue pursuing our own policy. And my understanding as well is that he wanted to take one of the goalkeepers from Leicester, and they've ended up signing Jorgensen for 25 million, you know, a significant amount of money. So you assume that he's going to be up and running as their number one. So already I was hearing little whispers, even on the tour, even 3 weeks into the job, that there's just a slight differing of opinion about targets, and you think, well, if that's happening now, where are you going to be in January, let alone next summer?
I think the issue at Chelsea is the Chelsea owners don't understand the club. They don't understand the fans. Now, the Chelsea fans, certainly post Abramovich here, or since the start of the Abramovich here, they like a personality. Mourinho, Ancelotti, Tuchel. They want a manager that basically talks like the Chelsea manager. Graham Potter didn't get it, and I don't think Maresca gets it. Maresca seems quite timid to me, and I think that the way they play the way he wants to play, quite a deliberate style of play. He hasn't got the players to do it. I think we saw a couple of clips in the US where the players just didn't know what to do when playing out the ball out from the back, and I get the impression that he's under massive pressure. City at home the first game of the season. The fans have got zero patience with the owners and with Maresca. I can see Chelsea being very, very messy really quickly.
I think if a manager's starting the season on the back foot, history tells you that it's very, very difficult to turn that around. That once it starts feeling too pressurised and there's too many eyes on you, the spotlight's too intense, it's very, very hard to turn that around.
There's one other manager that's we should mention, a new manager, Arne Slot. Now, to me, that seems to be the biggest job in England right now, replacing Jurgen Klopp. I think he's got a really tough challenge. And the way the market's gone this year, they haven't signed a player. They missed out on Zubimendi from Real Sociedad this week, so they might not sign a player. It kind of strikes me a little bit like Man United after Fergie. You know, David Moyes this summer, you know, they tried to bring in players and didn't do. He ended up with Marouane Fellaini. I'm not saying Liverpool will sign Marouane Fellaini, but it just looks a little bit like when Klopp leaves, you've got such a massive personality. You need to replace him quickly with a personality like Slot. Now, Slot seems to have a personality, but a player as well. Now, from what I'm hearing, that they're quite happy with the squad, and I think the issue Liverpool have got, the focus they have, they've got 3 massive players with a year 2 on the contract. Trent Alexander-Arnold, Mo Salah and Virgil van Dijk, and they have to find a solution to each of those different problems. And I think they're all very different problems. Alexander-Arnold is totally different to Salah and to Van Dijk because he's mid-20s, homegrown player, attracted interest from Real Madrid. If he decides to run down his contract, I think it would be quite difficult for him. We saw it with Steve McManaman a few years ago. Michael Owen, to a lesser extent, he didn't run his contract down, but he made it clear he wanted to go. If you're a homegrown player at Liverpool and you say you want to leave, that is a bad signal. Van Dijk and Salah, both early 30s now. I'd keep Salah. I'm not sure about Van Dijk, but again, can you lose 2 of these totems of the Jurgen Klopp team? So Arne Slot's walked into a difficult situation there, and I think it's going to be tough for him to kind of balance together the expectation with what he's got in front of him. He's got a lot of players that perform so well for the old manager, but how long will they stay, and will the club allow them to stay or take a business decision to move them on? So
it's almost like Klopp knew what he was doing, walking away at the right time. The one thing I would say about Slot is that he'll get far more time at Liverpool than Maresca will at Chelsea by an absolute mile, and that even if Liverpool lose 6 of the first 15 games, the pressure won't be on Slot.
The fans will stand by him.
Yeah,
as well.
They will, in a way that the Chelsea fans won't with Maresca, will they?
What? No. Well, no. And I do think one misstep that Slot may have made in pre-season anyway is that he's not, from what I'm told from the reporters I covered one of their games out there when they played Arsenal in Philadelphia. He's not done a lot of media. He's declined to do anything that isn't contractual, basically, which isn't a lot on those pre-season tours. And I just sort of think, if you're following such a great, iconic figure as Klopp, and also a fantastic communicator, you know, I mean, Klopp obviously didn't like elements of media and certainly the volume of it that he had to do, but when he was engaged in it, there's probably nobody you'd rather listen to. You know, sort of fascinating character. I think if you're coming in to replace that figure, you've got to kind of own that space a little bit more. And I don't think he's done much to build up some goodwill, which is easy wins really, which is just come and speak to the reporters on tour, come and get your message across, even if it's off the record, come and have a chat, try and convey some messaging so that if things do go south in the first couple of months of the season, those reporters closest to the club know what you're trying to do.
He did one little huddle with the reporters after their last game against Man United, but you know, for the listeners perhaps who don't know, that traditionally that these managers who go on these US tours, they do this big sort of sit down, don't they, with the reporters, where you maybe have sort of half an hour, 45 minutes. Ten Hag did it with us in LA. Some managers choose to do it, some don't, but it is an easy win, especially when you're first and you're new in the job. It just lays out exactly why you're there and what you're hoping to achieve, and fans can see it. You know, it builds goodwill with the reporters and the press pack who follow the club. It really is an easy win. I thought the same, but it was strange that he decided not to do it.
He needs, you know, the principal concern that Liverpool fans have is, what does the club look like now? Yeah. And that is what they're going to be talking about in the first few weeks of the season. And obviously they're going to judge those results in that kind of relative uncertainty and that turbulence. If there was a framework in place, and by that I mean Slot had really laid that out in a series of media interviews over the summer, then those Liverpool fans could say, okay, we've lost against XYZ, but we can see what he's trying to do because he's working towards this, then it just creates a bit more of a through line so that they don't react, between we're going to win the league, we're going to get relegated, each week with the results.
It's never a bad thing to communicate.
It's also something that fans might not be aware of. That media management is a big thing. Jurgen Klopp would also do like the Anfield Wrap. He would speak to the fans, and very few managers, Premier League managers, will speak to fans, channels or programs, whatever. They just won't do it. Klopp did it. And from our experience, there's been 3 occasions in recent years where Liverpool have carved out time with Klopp. For me, I flew to Bangkok there and back in 4 days once because Jurgen Klopp would speak to us. Now, that, again, is clever on his part, but it's great for us. It means that we've got, time with Liverpool's manager, the great communicators, like you say. And it's also what he gives to the local people as well. And that also, certainly the local reports, it builds up their trust, their favour, I guess, sometimes. And they know that if they've got a guy that is willing to help them out, then, they'll help the manager out. That's simple. It's human nature, isn't it? Now, if Slot isn't doing that, he may do stuff to start the season, I don't know, but if Slot isn't doing that, he's creating a problem for himself which will rear its head down the line. You have to communicate, especially at a club like Liverpool. People mock Liverpool at times for this, this means more, this special relationship, and I guess that if you're not a Liverpool fan, it would wind you up a little bit, but there is a unique sense to Liverpool and the communication with the fans and the club, so he has to get on board with that, otherwise it's going to be difficult. Just to wrap up on this section, just another manager that's quite a good communicator, Ange Postecoglou. How do you rate Tottenham's summer so far?
Yeah, good. I mean, I think they could go really well this season, Spurs. They've still got a little bit more they need to do in the market, and you are sort of taking a little bit on trust that players like Archie Gray and Lucas Bergvall are going to kick on, despite not having. I mean, they've got great potential, but we don't know what they're going to do in the Premier League. I think Solanke's a really good signing for them. I can just see him fitting straight into the way that Postecoglou wants to play. Gives them obviously more firepower, and they'll have had another pre-season working under Postecoglou and the way that this sort of Ange ball, this kind of extreme way of attacking and trying to win games anywhere on their own terms. So I mean, they're one of the clubs that have not been as affected by PSR as others. They've had quite a lot of headroom, and Daniel Levy's taken a lot of criticism in the past for not spending. They have spent this summer, and I think they may well look to do at least one more before the window closes. And if they can do that, and they can strengthen again, then top 4 is very much within their grasp.
Presumably he's sort of waving Conor Gallagher into his car park as he drives aimlessly around the M25 without a club.
Well, this is it. I mean, the Conor Gallagher thing is interesting in that they've been linked with him, and they've certainly been looking at him for a long time. But every time a club's gone in, Aston Villa went in, they've had an offer, Gallagher turned them down. Obviously, Atletico Madrid have gone in now. Tottenham have not tried to rival them seriously. So whether Daniel Levy's playing the ultimate game of brinkmanship here and really going right down to the wire to then get him at the end of the window for a cut price, I mean, it could be a masterstroke. I'd say it's odds against at the moment, but with Daniel Levy, you can never rule anything out.
So James on Tuesday reported that Man City's hearing over their 115 Premier League charges will be heard or begin on the 16th of September. So it's imminent, really.
Yeah, and it's a bit sooner than we all thought. There's a couple of reasons for that. I think the September the 16th date, I think the first thing to say about that is that that's a working assumption. That is the date that everybody expects it to be. Is a possibility that there might be another couple of legal challenges to that might kick it down the road a little bit. But it will be next month, and it's expected to be the 16th of September. And that is, I think, something of a belated victory for the Premier League, because they've come under an awful lot of criticism for not dealing with this issue before now. Obviously, it's a lot more complicated than the Everton and the Nottingham Forest PSR cases, but those cases were heard relatively quickly. They were appealed and resolved in that season, so that it was kind of contained within that campaign and didn't bleed into another year. And my understanding is that the time frame for this is that, as we say, we think it's the September the 16th start. The case is due to be heard for about 2 months, could run a little bit longer. There'll then be a verdict either side of Christmas, depending on who you talk to. Could be just before, could be just after. There's then likely to be an appeal, depending on what that outcome is. And then the idea is that appeal would then be finalised, resolved, everything completed by the end of the 24-25 season. And the reason they want to do that is because they don't want this to run into another campaign, to have another season potentially tainted or have big question marks over the division's leading protagonist. I mean, the Premier League is is more successful than it's ever been. It's one of the UK's most impressive and successful worldwide global exports, but it has had a cloud hanging over it for 5 or 6 years now, ever since these investigations were started. And you know, there's some criticism of City that maybe they've dragged their heels over this, and they've been slow in providing the documentation and the representation.
Well, that's part of the charge, isn't it? That a lot of the charges are because City, in the eyes of the Premier League, delayed handing over or were obstructive.
Yeah, and the critics of City are arguing that the reason they're doing that is the longer this is, they can kick the can down the road, and the more distance there is between the present and the period in which the bulk of these charges relate to, the harder it will be for the Premier League to really come down on them and potentially strip them of those titles, or try and sort of almost retrospectively replay those games, or redistribute the prizes from those seasons. That would be another minefield, and I don't think it's appropriate now for us to get into what exactly could happen, but it feels more likely that it wouldn't be. How can they go back and really rewrite the history of the Premier League?
I mean, it is important to stress here that Man City deny all charges, and they're going to fight them robustly. That's been their line all the way through. And I think also we have to stress as well, we talk about what can and can't happen. It'd be very difficult for competition regulations, really, for the Premier League to say you're relegated, because that would involve the EFL having to accept Man City. So I think we are looking at either points deductions or fines rather than a simple demotion, because, you know, when this happened in Scotland with Rangers, it was one whole body that the Scottish League at the time were able to put Rangers from the top division to the fourth division. That would be very difficult in England because of the way that the leagues are separated. So I think we have to stress to fans as well, don't just be expecting a demotion or this. It will be very much in terms of what is within the Premier League's gift. Yeah,
and I think that another point to make here is that 115 charges, from the people I speak to who are involved in this, there was a genuine surprise that there were that number of charges. I think the way that other legal minds would have attacked this would have been to be more targeted, to say, let's say there's 40 or 50 that we think we can really nail them on, let's go for that. Whereas I think what the Premier League have done is they've ended up just throwing everything at the wall and trying to see what sticks. And that has created an extremely, arguably unprecedentedly complicated case that it's frankly impossible for us to try and predict the outcome of it now.
I mean, I have to say, I've spoken to people at Man City who are there at the moment, who have left, who are very confident that City are going to prove themselves, you know, in the right on this, that they're confident they will win this battle against the Premier League, and that they will be proved to be vindicated, that they've done nothing wrong. That's the City perspective that I can put across, but I know that there are people, other clubs, that think the opposite. So,
and they did with UEFA, didn't they? You know, they looked like
that was a time-barred situation.
It was, so they were different, but they were very, very confident. I remember at the time when those charges were announced, where everyone's kind of piled in and said, you know, you're going to get unprecedented punishment and everything, that they were always very, very confident. And I know that they can't use the same legal reasoning this time, but they have maintained that confidence all the way through. I mean, the key phrase is irrefutable evidence that, you know, granted no one has seen. You know, presumably that will be the core of their case when this is finally heard. I mean, the worry, the broader worry beyond all of this is that, like you just mentioned, there's a knock-on effect it could have for the rest of the English game. That any kind of punishment, if they were to be found guilty, would be leapt upon by other clubs who have perhaps fallen foul of City winning games in certain seasons, or when you talk about titles being stripped, or, you know, point deductions. You know, that what I would like to see is this to be dealt with as cleanly as possible, in a way that allows everyone to kind of move on in the best way possible after it's all sorted. Because what you don't want, I mean, it's already been delayed by so long already, that we could still be talking about the knock-on effect of this in 5 years. That,
I think, is why the time frame's been brought forward a little bit. So there were reports earlier in the year, and I think they were accurate, that we were looking at maybe the autumn, maybe November sort of time that this would kick off. But if you then apply that time frame of the sort of 2.5 months for the case to be heard, and then a verdict, then an appeal, then you're looking into going into 25, 26 and that season. And I think there's just a desire now, a real concerted desire from the Premier League to just draw a line under all of this, innocent or not, innocent or guilty, whatever they are, whatever the outcome is. We need a resolution on this now. It's just hung over the league for far, far too long.
Rob, just to ask you, you cover Man City closely. We know that Pep Guardiola's contract expires next season. Next summer, I should say. He's he's given us some kind of contradicting statements recently that he was closer towards leaving than staying. Now he's kind of not, but obviously this is a big situation.
Yeah.
If Man City are preparing for next season in the Championship, it's going to be hard for him to stay. But so, do you expect Pep to commit to a new contract before this is resolved, or wait until the end of this?
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is a little bit of a strange situation, because a lot of the reporters who covered City when they won the league at the end of last season left the Etihad thinking that it wasn't beyond the realms of possibility that's the last that we could have seen in Pep. He was talking like a manager who had enough. He'd won everything. He was tired. He'd seen Klopp go. The way he was talking was of a manager who was at the end of his tether. And then in the summer, he kind of suggests that actually, you all misinterpreted what I was saying, and actually, I was just saying I was closer to the end of my career at City than I am at the start, which is obvious. But actually, I could sign a new contract. He's also on the record as saying that he would want, if there is to be some kind of punishment that City are given, that he would want to be the manager to see them through that. This is all going to come to a head, though, if the timeline is right at the same time. So you've got City potentially being given this a mammoth punishment if they are found guilty, obviously and Guardiola's contract coming to the end at the end of next season. So it would rely on Pep making a decision and using. I guess this will be an element to that. He said quite recently, last week in fact, when he talked about his future, that the biggest decision is for his life. He has to make the best decision for his life and his family. But this will all play a part in whether he decides to stay at City. He won't want to be seen to be walking away from City at a time when they are perceived to be in crisis. I can promise you that. He won't want that look. He'll want to be able to, if there is a punishment, whatever it is, he'll want to be the manager to see them through that. Listen,
this is going to dominate the coverage of the season, is it? So I think we're definitely going to return to this at some point, or maybe every point that we speak this season. But right now, we'll pass on to a different episode, I think.
And we'd love to hear what you want to know from us. If you're watching this on YouTube, please leave us a question in the comments, and we'll do our best to answer them the next time we are all together for another episode of The Football Reporters.